everybody. Back to Steve Cunningham with Wisdom of Our Father series continuation. We're with Father Daniel Heenan, the priest fraternity of St. Peter down in Mexico, south of the border. And before we start off, Father, welcome back. But could you lead us off in the Regina Caeli, please?
Yes, of course. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Regina Caeli laetare, alleluia. Quiaque meruisti portare, alleluia. Resurrexit sicut dixit, alleluia. Ora pro nobis Deum, alleluia. Gaudeat laetare Virgo Maria, alleluia. Quia surrexit Dominus vere, alleluia. Oremus. Deus, qui per resurrectionem Filii Tui, Domini nostri Iesu Christi, mundum laetificare dignatus est, presta quesumus per eius genetricem Virginem Mariam, perpetue capiamus gaudia vitae, per unium Christum Dominum nostrum.
Amen.
Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
And just for those, for education for people at home, we say that during this time period, right? At Easter, between Easter and Pentecost, right?
Yeah, that's right. It takes the place of the Angelus, usually, that we say at 6, noon, and 6 in the rest of the year. But during Easter season, we change to the Regina Caeli.
So you can always come here and learn something, everybody.
Actually, liturgically, the church has a different Marian antiphon that is associated with the divine office for different seasons of the year. So it's not only the Regina Caeli, so we also sing it at the end of Compline, for instance, and formerly even more often. But in other times of years, it's the Salve Regina or the Ave Regina Caelorum. So there's a variety of Marian antiphons that enrich the liturgical life of the church.
That's awesome. Yeah, most people, I think everyone just thinks to do the Angelus or the Salve at the end and never thinks about the change. Yeah. And that was, I think we mentioned it a couple of week ago with another priest that was the ending of it was Pope St. Gregory the Great wrote that last part during the procession.
Of the Salve or of the
Regina Caeli?
Oh, yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, there was a really great article on Verate about that, talking about, I can't remember where it came from, Golden Book is translated. People were literally dropping dead in the procession. Blood was coming off the sword of St. Michael. It wasn't actually probably not cool to see and all that, but reading it makes you a little bit more, wow, wasn't like a clean blade going in and sunshine and lollipops. It was, people were dropping dead during the walk.
Wow. Yeah. Intense.
So we're going to talk about another time when the masses or the bells were silenced was the letter Cristiada or the Cristeros. Some of you might have been familiar with the movie Greater Glory, and Father Heenan's right smack dab in the middle of ground zero where the resistance was, where the Cristeros basically was born. Would that be the right way?
Yeah. We're here in Jalisco, where Guadalajara is. It was one of the hot spots where there were more martyrs. In fact, I heard several years ago, I don't know if it's still true, but they say that the state of Jalisco in Mexico has more canonized saints than all of the rest of the Americas combined.
Wow.
As a result of the Cristiada. And it's amazing because this horrible religious persecution broke out not so long ago, right? So just a little bit less than 100 years ago, and just south of our borders, and many people don't know much about it.
I remember reading that they were still finding them in the 50s and killing them in the States, going up in the States and finding them.
Yeah, well, in fact, more people died. There were more martyrs after the conflict officially ended because they made a truce and they made all the Cristeros turn over their weapons to the government, and then they went around and rounded them up and killed many of them. So be careful.
Yeah, you got that. What happened in the Vendée? They could have taken Paris. They didn't put down the weapons. They got basically exterminated. Same thing with Cristeros. Obedience is a tough thing.
That's right. Definitely.
So how did that come about? Was the Constitution before President Calles was before that it led up to all this, or was it decades in the making?
Well, first of all, I'll just preface this and say I'm not an expert in this, just kind of a fan. So there's some great studies. For instance, there's a book by Jean Meyer that I highly recommend if you want to later read more of the details. I'm still kind of learning because it's just something that's so interesting. But the book by Jean Meyer that has some great photos is outstanding because the man came to Mexico to study the Cristiada as an atheist, and he left as a Catholic. The testimony of what he found converted him. So the history of Mexico is really quite a convoluted history of so many different interests of people that is very Catholic. You know, Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared here, and the people have the Catholic faith in their heart, but there's also a long history of a government that has been anti-Catholic. And the origins really go back to the colonial period, a conflict between what turned into royal Enlightenment interests when the French came to the Spanish throne, and Enlightenment ideas about rationalizing the faith and too many feast days and need to be more productive and all this kind of stuff that led to eventually the independence of Mexico, that had a lot of religious overtones, because many people thought, well, it was time for the Mexico to come of age, leave the mother country, thank her for all that she gave us, and become independent, because they wanted to defend the purity, according to some at least, the purity of the Catholic faith. So if you look on the Mexican flag and the colors, the red, the white, and the green, they say traditionally that the white is for the purity of the Catholic faith. But there was mixed in with all that the seeds of a great conflict, because many people suspect that a lot of the first revolutionaries were Masons or had Masonic influence. Their great hero, Miguel Hidalgo, was a priest, but not a very good priest. He was condemned of heresy. He was a womanizer, and there's some studies that suggest that he was probably a Mason himself. And so he rallied the poor to this cause, but not always with the purest of intentions. So right from the beginning of Mexico as an independent nation, there was a conflict between the church and the state. And it started increasing. You can probably point to Benito Juarez in the later half of the 19th century, who's like the George Washington of Mexico. Every town has at least 100 things named after him. And he's famous because he was indigenous, and he's looked at as the great reformer. Okay, but he was also in many ways a traitor to his country, according to more traditional-minded people, because he sold a lot of Mexico to the United States and oil interests and railroad interests. And he also started persecuting the church. He confiscated a lot of church land. He had to pay for his wars to solidify his power. And so he said, well, we're going to confiscate all the wealth that the church has from the colonial period, and we're going to pay off the war debts, and we're going to give land to the common people. Well, actually, that didn't happen, because I forget the exact numbers, but it's, if we want to kind of make an estimate, it's like he confiscated something like $40 million in those days of church wealth, and like $500,000 of that went to actually pay off debts and veterans and everything. The rest went to his cronies. Right, so a common thread in the story of persecution of the church. Right, Henry VIII paid his cronies with land confiscated from the church, and Benito Juarez started doing things like he made it illegal for the church to educate. So he kicked the church out of the schools. The Jesuits had already gone. Right, that was a bad point in history in terms of them abandoning all the universities and everything. But now the rest of the religious couldn't run schools. The church couldn't, for example, he separated the church marriage and the civil marriage, something we still have to this day, where Mexicans, like the French and other countries, have this laicized anti-clerical society that says you have to go get married before justice of the peace, and if you want a sacramental wedding, you have to go to the church. Now, the interesting thing is Benito Juarez, who made that rule, when his daughter got married, he didn't even allow her to have a civil marriage. He said civil marriages are for prostitutes, and so he procured a religious wedding for his own daughter. Right, so a little bit of a double standard there.
Shocker.
So the Constitution, the reforms he made, were one step, and then there was a new Constitution made in, I think it was 1917 in Mexico, that put in more anti-clerical provisions. And for a while, they weren't enforced very much. They kind of looked the other way because you have this big problem of it's one thing to say it, but to actually do it, you're going to have a revolution on your hands because of the fact that the church is more present to people in the rural areas of the country, than the government, right? They respect much more the church than the government. So you have to tread carefully. But getting into the 20s and with Calles in particular, but also Obregón and others, the restrictions on the church became more and more severe. And the first step, actually, there's a couple of encyclicals that Pope Pius XI wrote addressing the situation that are quite interesting to read, because he laments that this is amongst, he says, I think in one of them, since the apostolic times, since the early persecutions in Rome, we haven't seen things so terrible as what we're seeing in Mexico right now. And so the church asked permission of the Pope to basically put the whole country under interdict. Although, to clarify, they said it wasn't an interdict because the sacraments kept being celebrated, but the church took the decision, okay, we can't operate under these conditions, because the government was saying things like, okay, in certain regions you can only have so many priests, right? And the proportions were horrible. It's like one priest for every 50,000 people, Or in other places they're saying, you can only have this percentage of priests, and the only priests that can work are those who are married, right? So basically making it impossible.
Yeah.
So they said, we can't work under these circumstances, so we're going to pull all the priests out of the churches. Okay, we're giving them to the care of the faithful, and the priests can't be there anymore, so that the people rise up against this unjust government.
So, more as things change, more as stay the same, right? I remember, what was it? I got quite a few books on. I got Meyer's book on it, but one of them goes, "Poor Mexico, so far from Rome, so close to the United States."
Right. Yeah, they have some. They have a saying here, something like, when the United States gets a cold, Mexico gets the flu, or something like this.
I even heard President Coolidge was siding with the Mexican government during this.
Well, yeah, and that's a interesting tale of intrigue, because the role the United States had for a long time with the Mexican government has been rather complicated. There was a great fascination on the part of the early Mexican liberals with everything in the United States. When they made their first constitution, they wanted to be like the French Revolution and like the American Revolution. So it was, a few decades later that Mexico gained its independence, 1812, I believe. And they wanted to imitate everything in the United States. So much so that there's a tale about the American ambassador arrives, and one of the first Mexican presidents has made this great room in one of the palaces, and they in this huge dining room where all these European dignitaries are and everything. On one end of the room, there's a big portrait of George Washington, and on the other end of the room, there's some portrait of a Greek god, and this was sort of their idea of liberalism, right?
Wow.
And yeah, so the American government ended up siding, for instance, with Benito Juarez, because they thought Benito Juarez was going to restore order. And in a certain, you can kind of, it's easy to judge in retrospect, but the history of Mexico was horrible. They had, so many different changes of presidents and leaders and murders and all this stuff. And Benito Juarez brought a certain amount of order and stability. He ruled for a long time. And then even after him, with Porfirio Diaz, who had an extremely long presidency, running always on the platform of no re-election. They said, after me, after I get everything in order, there'll be no re-election. So the United States saw them as adding stability, which was in their interest, and also Benito Juarez sold them lots of land and everything. So when it came to the Cristiada, the American government ended up selling weapons to the forces of Calles to put down this supposed rebellion, which was really an uprising to defend basic rights of being able to have church, have mass.
Yeah, that was the weird part, because Silent Cow was one that, when they asked him about putting a phone in the White House, told them just to walk down the street. He wasn't going to put a phone in the White House, thought it was an overreach. Yeah, let's send them a bunch of weapons.
Yeah. On the other hand, the Knights of Columbus had a helpful role, because when they became aware, probably heeding the call of Pius XI, who brought the attention of what was going on in Mexico to the rest of the world, the Knights of Columbus came to help the Cristeros in their effort.
Yeah, there's a march in D.C. where the KKK is protesting them, the Knights of Columbus bringing in refugees during the time. But was it like they had an underground group down in Mexico too, helping out before they basically got unified with?
Yeah. So the idea was at first the idea wasn't to take up arms, but to do a boycott. So another great figure is Blessed Anacleto González Flores, who we need a project to translate his works, because he is an outstanding figure, martyred, I think, at the age of 27. But he started something like 30 different newspapers before he died a martyr. So he was an intellectual, and wrote, for instance, there's one book, it's called Tu serás rey, you will be king. And it's a call to the youth. And he's got this stunning, compelling rhetoric where he says, the youth are always looking for something adventurous. They have this natural instinct to give yourself to something, right? And our age demands that we be ready for martyrdom, because our nation depends on you. You have to come to the rescue of the cause of the faith. And he goes on to explain how every age has been defined by its heroes, those who are willing to risk the most for a cause that's greater than themselves.
Oh, wow.
And he did exactly that. So he went to Mass daily. He was a lawyer. I think he was married with 2 daughters, if I'm not mistaken. And he organized this Catholic Action League, trying first a boycott. So they wanted to collapse the economy by saying that the Catholics are only going to buy the most minimal things to show the government that we're not happy with all this. And it started to work, actually. But the government came back with greater restrictions, and it became evident that they weren't going to be able to do anything unless they take up arms.
How many days or weeks or months did they do the boycotting before they said, we gotta do it?
I'm not sure exactly how long that lasted. I'd have to look that up. But it lasted. It went through different phases too, where they increase what they were boycotting, and they would send up balloons, for instance, with these pamphlets so they would scatter all over the city, so people would know what they were being asked to do. But eventually, the peaceful protest was not going to be sufficient. The government became more and more obstinate in their attack on the church.
And that was honorable of them, right? It was just war theory. They got to try every option before violence. Basically.
Yeah. And as a last resort, right, to mobilize the peasants. Really, it was mostly peasants from the outlying areas who may not have known their catechism very well, I imagine, but they knew that if someone insults Our Lady and if someone takes away the Mass, and it became quite obvious because the measures against the church went on increasing, right? So they were looking for pretexts to blame the Catholics for violence against the government and all this to increase the measures they were taking. And so it began by limiting the church to, for instance, not having to only exercise ministry in churches and their own buildings. They couldn't do processions. They outlawed the cassock, and then they flat out outlawed the Mass, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's when you get the biggest amount of martyrs or figures like Miguel Pro. Actually, Miguel Pro was earlier, but Miguel Pro exemplifies what many priests had to do, right? He went around in disguise, and there's pictures of him even, he would dress up like a mechanic or a bum even and lay on a park bench, and people would come and go to confession with him, and he looked like just a drunk bum laying there.
I think it was your Father Romanowski had a sermon on him, and he mentioned that he knew the authorities were looking for him, and he'd go up in between two federales and go, "Hey, did you get that guy yet?" And he said no, and just walk off.
They say, God gives each of us the graces and talents and everything we need. So if you read his biography, it says he was a practical jokester since his youth, and it came to be quite useful. And his brother too was a martyr, because his brother actually was accused of attempting to kill the president. They blamed him because of his role in organizing this the resistance and everything, and they framed him for planting a bomb in the car of Obregón.
Who? How many priests in general do you think were martyred? I mean,
I don't know. There were lots. Not all have been canonized. In Jalisco, the Diocese of Guadalajara did a great effort to get many of them canonized, but there's others. There's more. For instance, we have one of our deacons who's going to be ordained a priest this year. He is related. He has like a great uncle or something who I can't remember the relation exactly, but who was martyred in the Cristiada. And I went with Deacon Javier a couple months ago to meet the retired cardinal here, who was instrumental in getting all these saints canonized, and he was disappointed that he didn't know about that case. And he said, well, you have to send me the information. Maybe we can organize another campaign to canonize even more of these martyrs.
Wow. And
not just priests, but many lay people too.
Right.
a very interesting. You mentioned the movie For Greater Glory, which kind of mixes a number of stories. So historically, it's not 100% accurate, but I think it's good. It brings a part of history to life that many people are unfamiliar with. But there's a great book by Graham Greene called The Power and the Glory. So Graham Greene, if you're not familiar, is one of these literary converts, an English author who was fascinated with Mexico. So he came over to Mexico during this whole thing to observe, to see. And the book, The Power and the Glory, which was actually on the index for a short while because the main character is a priest who's disgraceful, who fathered children and wasn't interested in being a very good priest for a while. But it starts out with him, lamenting his own unworthiness, but being amazed at the faith of the people. So he would, he had this mass kit he would go around with, and there was like a line of people who wanted to carry his mass kit. And they knew that if you got caught carrying his mass kit, you would be killed. To have a mass item was illegal. And he reflects in this how he's too cowardly to die a martyr. But yet somehow he's involved in the martyrdom of these other people who are so eager to lay down their lives just by carrying his mass kit.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think Tampa was just Blood-Drenched Altars.
Yeah.
I've read that one and No God Next Door.
Yeah. And like I said, that there's so many interesting stories that need to be discovered. So I've enjoyed traveling to little towns when I have a chance, and I need to do it more. But you go to a little town here or there where there's a martyr, and they haven't really capitalized on this like in Europe, where these places become pilgrimage sites. Although I've had the desire to organize a pilgrimage to try and follow the route of these unknown martyrs. But you can come across so many interesting stories. I discovered recently a martyr, Saint Rodrigo Aguilar, who he was killed in a little town called Ejutla. And I went to this town, and it's still very traditional because it's very remote. And there's still like people praying their rosary out, walking around in the town square, and the old people always take their hat off to the priest. Just a lot and they toll the bells for the Angelus, and they've preserved a lot of this. And this saint had to go into hiding and was betrayed then by the person who was protecting him, and so he got beaten up. And they stripped of all his goods, even his clothes, right? And he has to walk all these miles to hide in a convent. And there he opened up a seminary in secret. And he had to celebrate Mass. It was like 6 months or so. And I got to celebrate Mass on that altar. That was awesome. And the nuns, the same order of nuns who are still there. We just came with a group of seminarians, and we decided we'd have a sung Mass in this altar. And none of the nuns were going to attend Mass. They'd already gone to Mass. But they started observing the traditional Mass, and it dawned on them that that's like St. Rodrigo's Mass. And they all started coming into their cloister section. And then there's a seminary in town. The word spread, and all the seminarians came just out of the blue to attend this Mass. So St. Rodrigo was there running his little seminary. And the soldiers got word of where he was hiding, so they came, and the people come to him and they said, you gotta run. And he says, I have a duty to do. He says they can take my life, but they're not going to take our faith. So he sent all his seminarians away. That he was giving them a Latin test. So they were probably happy that. But he destroyed all the records of the seminarians because he didn't want them to get caught, because this was common. They were ordaining priests in secret, in basements and places. And they ended up they caught him there, and they walked him through the town, and they hung him from a mango tree
Oh, wow.
but which is still there. That it's kind of like a relic, this mango tree where they hung him. And as he was being hung, he gave his rosary to one of the executioners as a parting gift, and said, "I forgive you." And so his relics are there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, awesome stories.
One question that came in, Sarah asked, are priests ever allowed to take up arms?
Priests are not supposed to take up arms normally, although there's many cases of exceptions.
Who's that?
Yeah.
Everyone knows about him, right?
Yeah, and he's from a town not too far from here. So the town of Sahuayo. He's not canonized because he's from a different diocese. So it depends on how they organize these. Or he was only recently canonized, sorry. So I've been able to celebrate Mass near his tomb as well. So Jose Sanchez del Rio from Sahuayo. Now, Sahuayo was really the first town where violence broke out. And when you go to Sahuayo, you can visit not only the relics of Jose Sanchez del Rio, but there's a museum there, and there's actually a whole bunch of other martyrs, unknown. But what happened is when the government ordered the churches closed, okay, so I mentioned that first the church ordered the priests to leave, but they left the churches open. Then the government closed the churches, and a group of men in Sahuayo said, "Over our dead bodies." And literally that's what happened. They would not let the government go into the church, because what they were doing in many places, they were turning the churches into stables. Mm-hmm. And actually, there's a church right here close to where we are, where I've celebrated Mass too, where they literally put horses in the church. You know, they took it and they put horses and other animals. So Jose Sanchez del Rio, of course, got himself in the sights of the enemies for martyrdom, because he said, "You can't do this," when he was in prison, and he let all the chickens out of the cages because they were training cockfights. And he said, "This is this is sacrilegious," and he let all the animals escape. And then he went back to his cell, and then they found him in the morning, and they're like, "You know who did this?" He's like, "Yeah, I did this." And what an example he is, because he's the one that, he begged his mother to let him join the army when he was like 13 years old or something. Mm-hmm. And his mother, of course, like any mother would say to their 13-year-old, no. But he said to his mother, "But Mom, never has it been easier to win heaven than now." And so his mom couldn't resist that childlike faith. And so his role was to go around the army in the camp and ask all the soldiers if they prayed the rosary that day. Like, he was reminding them, like, why we're fighting. So in Sahuayo, when I last went there, we got to meet an older person who had stories, like a still living memory, who told us about some miracles that had occurred around the tomb, right? So let me make sure I'm remembering the details well, but one of the soldiers who I think was involved in his execution was still around in that town, and they had set up a little shrine to him shortly after his death, and this soldier was recalcitrant. So he would go into he wanted to destroy the shrine. So he went in with a couple of other soldiers, I think, and they were going to fire on the little shrine that they had made, but the guns wouldn't go off. So they went outside and they shoot the rifles up in the air and they work fine. Then they go back inside and they take aim, doesn't work. And they did this like 3 times. And finally, the guy realized this is a message. So the soldier dropped his weapons, began to cry, and this person from the town said that soldier almost never left the shrine for the whole rest of his life. He converted and would be seen there in front of the relics praying every single day until he died like a couple years earlier before we had made that visit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Incredible.
The Constitution that there's now is not much different from what it was then, right? It's nothing really got repealed. Am I correct on that?
Well, some things changed over time. So when the whole conflict ended, there was a negotiation between the church and the state, and many people, actually, there's still criticisms, even saying that the Pope betrayed the church in advocating to end the war prematurely, and telling the church to accept terms that weren't favorable in the end to the church. All the bishops had all left the country. The bishops had all left, most of them to the United States. There's actually, I think it was still functioning, a Jesuit seminary in New Mexico. It was specifically to train priests to go back to Mexico when the Jesuits left. But when the bishops came back and they did this negotiation so that the churches would be open, they accepted some terms that were not so favorable, like the fact that you couldn't have processions in the street, the priests couldn't wear clerical garb, the marriage thing, various restrictions. So we live, even to this day, under some difficult conditions as far as that's concerned. People are surprised. Even people here even talk about how they say, how is it possible the United States is a Protestant country, but yet the church has more rights there than it does in Mexico? And it's true to a certain extent. Like, you can't give a tax-deductible donation to the church here in Mexico. They don't allow that. But some things lightened up in 1978, 1979. John Paul II made a historic visit. I think John Paul II came to Mexico 6 times. And so they gave him honorary citizenship. They say here fondly that John Paul II was the first Mexican pope. They love John Paul II. And he showed up in his cassock. So the government had this dilemma on their hands when John Paul II showed up, because it was still basically the same ruling party from the Cristiada that ruled. They call it the perfect dictatorship because the name changed, but it was really the same structure for 70 years. There was in the whole country only a handful of people that ever got elected from a different party. So John Paul II shows up in his cassock, and the president thinks, yeah, they're not really interested in the Pope here in Mexico. It's not going to be a big deal. They've forgotten about it. And he arrived and went on this motorcade from Puebla, which is a historic city, because when Cortez arrived, he had some important battles there and made their march on Mexico City over the mountains to conquer Mexico City. So they followed the highway from Puebla to Mexico City, and millions of people were there. The whole stretch of highway, there was not a section of it where there were not people just wanting to catch a glimpse of him. So they had this dilemma. What are we going to do? The Pope's the head of state. We're going to fine him. We're going to give the Pope a ticket. So they had to make a concession to him, and he put certain demands on the government to lighten up certain things. Mexico only established diplomatic relations with the Vatican at that time, finally, wow, in 1979. And certain things didn't change until later. I believe the law on wearing a cassock was changed officially in the 90s. There were changes. I think priests couldn't vote for a long time. What else? Yeah, and there's still the processions. There's still some things that haven't ever really changed.
Hugh asks, what about the opinion of John Meyer that the Cristeros War wasn't exclusively a religious conflict, but an agrarian one?
Well, I think there might be something to that, because everything in Mexican history is tied up with the land question. So if you read, there's a great book on the history of Mexico called Mexico, Land of Volcanoes. And it's called that because everything is erupts. It's unstable. We have here one of the most active volcanoes in the Western Hemisphere. So ever since the independence, all the political movements have been tied up with questions of land distribution. No? But then it gets more complicated because you have this pretext, like I mentioned, with Juarez and others who say, they're for the people, they're to reform the land. And then they dismantle these huge estates where in former times, many of the landlords, they may have had, poor people working on their lands, but from the Spanish, really Habsburg times, there was this expectation that the landlords had a responsibility for the physical and spiritual well-being of the people that worked the lands. At first, there was the Indians that were entrusted to those landlords, and later with more mestizaje, the peasants in general, the government comes in and takes the land and sometimes gives away a little bit of it to people who don't know how to run a farm on their own. But hey, have some land and good luck, right? And then these people fall into greater and greater poverty, and they become subject to certain demigods. So there was probably an element of that same frustration amongst the poor people in the rural areas of the government doing the same sort of thing, saying that they're going to help them with the poverty in rural areas and the agrarian problem, and not really doing it, rather enriching their friends.
John asked for another Cristero, your favorite Cristero story, other than what you probably just said.
I was hoping someone would ask that because those are the most fun. So one of the most popular Cristeros is Santo Toribio Romo. Maybe you've heard of him because he's become mixed up with legend. He's also supposedly the patron of illegal immigrants, because there's some story about him appearing to some people trying to illegally cross into the United States and giving them some dollars or something. Not, I don't doubt that miracles and apparitions happen, but that sounds a little fishy to me. Yeah. But Santo Toribio Romo was the pastor of the church, the parish in Tequila. Tequila is not just a drink, but it's a town. It's about 45 minutes from Guadalajara. He was born in a town called Santa Ana de Guadalupe. So as a seminarian, the persecution broke forth, and he, in secret, in his free time, built his own little chapel near his home, where he celebrated his first mass. Just from a personal note, I got to celebrate a mass there, again with a group of seminarians, because we bring seminarians down here to learn Spanish and everything, and we take these little tours. And as we're celebrating, we're getting ready for the mass, and there's a lady who's the sacristan there, and she's watching in admiration, first of all, seeing all these young men in cassocks, because to this day, the cassock is not very common in Mexico. And so she's watching with amazement. And after the Mass, she was just floored. She said, I was imagining that as St. Toribio Romo celebrated his first Mass, it probably looked a lot like that. She was probably wrong, because we had a solemn high Mass. And I think in persecution, you probably didn't have that luxury. Yeah. Nevertheless, the essence of the Mass, right? So Santo Toribio Romo, I have a quote here from him, where as a seminarian, he wrote in his journal, Lord, pardon me if I am overstepping, but I beg you to grant me this favor. Do not let one day of my life pass without saying Mass, without embracing you in Holy Communion. Give me a great hunger for you, a thirst to receive you, that I might be left uneasy all day, until I will have drunk of this water which gushes forth unto eternal life. From that blessed rock of your wounded side, O my good Jesus, I beg that you grant me to die without having let a single day go by without having said Holy Mass. Okay? However, he was prohibited from saying Mass. An armed rebellion began in 1926. Okay, and he said again in his diary, I pray to the true God that he command that these times of persecution cease. Look, your Christs cannot celebrate the Holy Mass. Rescue me from this painful test. Your priests having to live without celebrating the Holy Mass. Nevertheless, how sweet it is to be persecuted for the sake of justice.
Oh, wow.
So he moved from the church. He had to move into an abandoned factory in a ravine outside of town, and was hiding there with his brother. His brother was his vicar, so two brothers were priests in the same town, and their sister, because in that time, usually the youngest sister in a family, if her brother became a priest, she would give up marriage to serve her brother, like as a housekeeper and a cook. So there were, I think, 10 in the family, and the sister was their housekeeper, and she took care of her two brothers. And he says, when he knew his death was imminent, he asked the night before, he went to confession to his brother, because he suspected he would soon die. And he said, "Oh, Tequila, you impart to me the tomb, but I give you my heart." Okay? And so they found him hidden there in the factory. They said, "This is the pastor. We must kill him." Okay? And so they shot him. And as he was there dying, his sister took him in her arms, and she said, "You need to say the call of the Cristeros, right? Viva Cristo Rey." Okay? She said, "Courage, Father Toribio, and may the most merciful Jesus receive you." And he died in her arms. So there's a shrine there. They still have his little cell you can visit. And I had the privilege to celebrate Mass on that altar. And can I tell you another one?
Go for it.
Okay. So this isn't about, there's martyrs connected with it, but in Mexico, in the state of Guanajuato, there's a shrine to Cristo Rey. It's called the Hill of Cubilete. Okay, this is another dream of mine, to organize a pilgrimage, chart style, a walking pilgrimage to this mountain, because the bishops, okay, I think it was in 1925, or maybe the idea began even earlier. They saw the tensions and everything, and the government trying to take over what is rightfully Christ's. And so the bishops got together. They said, "We're going to consecrate Mexico to the Sacred Heart of Jesus." And they responded to an initiative begun by Father Mateo, who we talked about before. And Mexico and Spain became the first nations to publicly consecrate the nation to the Sacred Heart. It was the bishops who did it. They built this monument on top of this hill that's one of the highest in the region and the geographical center of the country. And the government did not like it very much. Okay, they invited the papal nuncio or the papal observer to come and consecrate the cornerstone. And the day after, he was expelled from the country. So that was the severing of diplomatic relations. Then all these people started climbing this mountain. There were no roads, but they had this mass up there, and suddenly there's like 25,000 people who climbed like a 15, I think it's almost 15,000 feet high or something like this, to be at Mass. So then the government sent dynamite and blew it up. And then the bishops got together and said, "You know what? We're going to build a bigger one." And there were several of them destroyed in all this, but it became a chapel of perpetual adoration. The Nocturnal Adoration Society began adoring the Blessed Sacrament on this enormous mountain with a statue of Christ the King on top of it. The current statue is not the most beautiful. The older one was better. But nonetheless, from a long way away, you're driving down this highway, and you can see this enormous statue of Christ the King. And it became a rallying cry. Viva Cristo Rey, the Sacred Heart is the image. We had some prayer cards made of the prayer of consecration. When the bishops all pleaded that this land belongs to Christ the King, and we are all ready to give you even our blood so that your rights may be protected. And at the bottom of that hill, there's a shrine, a chapel to Our Lady, Queen of Martyrs, and they have relics of hundreds of priests and lay people who were killed in the persecution. And there you can find a ton of amazing stories.
I've seen the statue. I didn't know it was on top of a 15,000-foot mountain in the heart of Mexico, though.
Yeah, I may not be 100% accurate on the height, but it's a high mountain, and when you go up there, you get this great view of the whole countryside, because it's kind of an isolated mountain.
Yeah.
And so it gives you this spectacular view, and you're up there kind of in the clouds, and you see Christ reigning over Mexico. It's amazing.
Is it still an adoration? They still use it?
I don't know if they do have adoration there. I'm not sure if it's perpetual, but they do have adoration up there, and I've been able to celebrate Mass up on top of that mountain as well. It's quite remarkable.
I immediately thought of Sacre Coeur when you mentioned that, when the French built that in reparation for the French Revolution.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing that these enemies of Christ, they're really they know the power of these images, right? Because if you go to the El Cerro de los Ángeles outside of Madrid, just similar, right? This mountain, when the king consecrated Spain to the Sacred Heart, you have those terrible photos from the Spanish Civil War, which was almost the same time, also bloodshed against the church, and the soldiers are firing at a statue.
Yeah.
Like, really, you're scared of a statue? But it was so important to them to blow it up. And there's miracles too, because when they dynamited that statue, everything got demolished basically, except his heart. The Sacred Heart was preserved intact.
Oh, wow.
And it's in the custody of these nuns, these Carmelite nuns who live right there next to the site.
Yeah, I remember the nuns. I can't remember the name. She got dragged down the street a couple times. That's another topic.
There's at Cubilete, as they mentioned, they tell a little bit of these stories, and here I think there's a great example for us in these times we're living in, especially that the church should take into account, I think, and imitate these examples. There's this young priest who was called to minister to a convent, and he had no fear, right? And so when they asked for sacraments, he went no matter what. And all these people said, "No, Father, don't go. You gotta preserve your life. You gotta hide." And he says, "I'm a priest." So then they get on his trail, and he has to hide out in this house. And the lady of the house says to him, "You know what, Father? I'm sorry, but you're gonna get killed." He says, because he wasn't dressed as a priest, obviously. He says, "Father, you stand no chance." He says, "You have priest written all over your face." And I love meditating on that, because we as priests should think of that all the time. Like, is our zeal for souls so evident that someone would say that to us, even if we weren't dressed as priests? Like, no, you proclaim priest to everyone. So
there's something different.
You're gonna get
it. That's beautiful. Well, any parting words?
Well, I hope more people can discover all of this richness, and that's, as I said, I want to organize a pilgrimage so people can come and get to know all this. But I think it's good to know the story, because if this could happen, this kind of persecution of the church could happen so close to home, in a country that where more people are Catholic than in the United States, and so recently. Well, we shouldn't think it's impossible, but we need to ask ourselves, I think, if we have the same zeal that our forebears had. You know, like, would we be willing to risk so much to defend the rights of the church, or are we content to just kind of roll over and let it all slip away? Because, well, dying for the faith is hard and scary.
I mean, I immediately keep the San Patricios keep popping up in my head, because I don't know how many people know about them, but they remember they were at one of the battles in Texas, and they're shooting at the Mexicans, and the Irishmen are going, wait a minute, there are priests over there. I see nuns. Are we on the wrong side? And risking life, they change sides.
Yeah. That's why to this day in certain parts of Mexico you have Mexicans whose last names begin with O. Yeah. O something.
Maybe that'd be a topic for down the road. I found out that about a year ago and became a big fan of those guys.
Yeah.
Anyway, Father, so can we get your final blessing?
Yeah. Okay. Benedictio omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et maneat semper. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you, Father. Appreciate it.
God bless you all.